So today I wanted to go through what I call the practical side of Dynamo, the side that's a little less talked about. But this is AIA accredited presentation, so I'm required to show these, however briefly. We'll just skip right through that. And so, like I said, I think most people associate Dynamo with doing things like this. It's all about formal geometry, gymnastics. And I'm not going to do any of that today. What I'm going to show you is the practical side. But of course, what is the practical side? The way that I look at it, it's all of these things. So it's about data management. It's about verifying data that's in your model. It's about setting Revit files up. And we all know, if you've ever set a Revit file up, you all know that that can be a rather lengthy process to go through. Dynamo can greatly speed that up. Dynamo can automate repetitive tasks that you have to do in Revit all the time. It can run complex calculations, some that Revit can do, some that maybe Revit can't do. It can combine data in new ways. Data tends to be a little bit siloed in Revit. Dynamo doesn't have those restrictions. You can manage your views and your sheets and just overall general management of Revit views. So I'm going to try to touch on a little bit of all of those things today. And this is the agenda. As usual, I'm probably biting off way too much than I can chew, but we'll just see how it goes. So part one is what I'm calling data mining. It's getting information in and out of your file. Both just pure data, but also manipulating data that's already in Revit using Dynamo. And then this part two is talking about project management. So first part of that is project setup, creating worksets, creating levels and views, and then also project maintenance. And then just before we get into Dynamo, just a couple of resources that I think are really important for anyone that's using Dynamo is obviously the dynamobim.org site. That is the home of Dynamo. But there's also a pretty cool site called Dynamo Nodes that I actually go to quite often. It has these workflow posts every so often, and it's actually a pretty cool site. And it also has a pretty extensive library of nodes, hence the name of the site. And then, like Paul said, I have some videos on blackspectacles.com, so if you're looking for training, you can go there. That page is the Dynamo course. And then also SOM's Vimeo page. We post periodically Dynamo videos and Revit videos and things like that. The two videos that you see right here, this is episode 1 and 2 of a Dynamo series that we've started. Dynamo episode 3 is way overdue, but eventually I'll post that as well. So that's another resource for you. And with that, we'll get out of PowerPoint and get into Revit and Dynamo. So the first thing I want to do, and we're talking about data and getting data in and out of a Revit model, is it's getting parameters and setting parameters. So it's parameters that exist within Revit, pulling them into Dynamo, doing something to them, and then setting them back into a Revit file. So to demonstrate this, it's a very simple, straightforward idea, but I have this model here, and you can see it's got two levels, and it's got walls that are at various heights. And what I want to do is, rather than clicking on these walls one by one or trying to select them and changing the constraints of the walls, I'm going to use Dynamo to just do it all at once. Because we all know we've had models where walls are set to all kinds of weird constraints, and you just basically want to reset everything. And so that's what this definition is going to do. Now I'm going to start this one from scratch. Most of the rest of these I'm going to start sort of in the middle because I don't want to repeat information. But when you're doing this, the first thing you have to do is go and grab the walls out of Revit and get them into Dynamo. Now there's various approaches that you can do that, but if you want to just grab everything, you can do it by category. So I'm going to type in categories, and this is the node that I want. And then I'm going to hit that down and then type walls. It just gets me down here to where the walls are. One thing you notice is that there's a much more extensive list of categories in Dynamo than there is in Revit. There's a lot of sort of hidden categories that Revit doesn't expose that Dynamo does. But I'm just after walls. And then what I have to do is tell Dynamo to collect all elements of category. And if you don't spell these things perfect, nothing pops up, which is really annoying because I'm a terrible speller. But then this takes that category and it pulls all of the elements in. And of course, the first time I'm doing this, something goes wrong. What is going on here?
You want all elements of category?
Oh, yeah, of category, sorry. For some reason, type the whole thing and it goes way down the list. There we go. So that brings in all of the elements of that particular category. Now what I want to do is get a specific parameter from all of the walls. So this is a node that I'm going to use extensively tonight, and you will use also. And it's get parameter by. It's another one where you have to end up typing a lot before it will pop up. Get parameter by value and name. And so you plug this into here, and the parameter that I'm looking for in this particular case is the base constraint. So how I do inputs like this is with a code block. So here's the first code block.
That's right.
And so whenever you're doing this as an input, you just simply type what the parameter name is. So base constraint. And because it's essentially a string, you have to put it in quotation marks. Now, knowing what to put in here, you simply, in Revit, if I click on this wall, any of these parameters that are listed here can be input into Dynamo. So base constraint is the one that I want in this case. So now I have grabbed all of the walls, and I have the base constraint for all of those walls. And you can see them listed there. So now what I want to do is establish what the base constraint actually, sorry, hold on just a second here. Now what I want to do is establish what the base constraint is. So I'm actually going to do another code block, and this one I'm going to, no, not a code block. I'm going to do it with a level. So levels. This basically just allows you to select levels that are in the project. So there's 3 levels in this project. I'm going to select level 1 as my base constraint. And then I'm going to use the equal, or is x equal to y. And so I'm getting the base constraint from all of the walls, and then I'm saying just show me the ones that are equal to level 1. And then I'm using this as a filter, as a test, because what comes out of this is a series of true-false statements. And whenever you have a list of true-false, you can use the filter by Boolean mask to get a list of all the items that are true and all of the items that are false. Now, rather than saying true and false, Dynamo says in and out. I don't know why. It's probably a code thing. But I'm going to move these up a little bit, plug this in as my list, and then my mask in this case is this right here. So now I have in one list, I have a list of items that have a base constraint of level 1, and then another list of items that are not level 1 base constraint. So now what I want to do is set the parameter for those walls, set a different parameter, set the top constraint. So this is set parameter by name. And so what I'm going to do here is out of the in, which it says empty list, which I'm not sure. Did I spell that right? Okay, I'm getting all falses. Why am I getting all falses? Base constraint. Okay, so something's not right here.
Should we use a Z instead of Y?
I'm sorry?
Z instead of Y. Wouldn't the level be like this equal?
No. In this case, it's what I want is the actual base constraint. So let's see. So this, of course, this was working perfectly when I was doing this before. Who knows? So it's listing both. Parameter. Okay, well, let me just finish this, and then I have a completed version that I know works, so I'm not quite sure what's going on, but I'm going to plug this into the element, and then for the parameter I need the top constraint. And then the value for this is another level. Oops. Come on. So level, and then for this I want it to be level 2. And then you plug that into the value. And that should, if things were working, oh, it might have been because I had that selected. So let's run that. Nope, that's not it. All right, well, let me just exit that and we'll do the completed version. Now I did the complete version in a slightly different way. So the difference here is that, and I'm going to make all of these files available for you so you can reverse engineer them. The difference here in this one is that I actually use the name rather than the level itself. That's just one little extra step here. But if we have the base constraint at level 1 and make the top constraint level 2, and then if we run this, you can see that all of the walls went up to level 2. I'm not quite sure what went wrong in the other one. And then you can just do that for all the ones at level 2. So we can change this to level 2, change the top constraint to level 3, run it again, and all of the walls go up like that. So now you know that every single wall that's on whatever level are going up to the top constraint. So this is just to show how you can use parameters in Dynamo to actually drive geometry in a Revit file. And I'm going to go ahead and close that and open up another file. And this one is going to calculate floor area ratio. And floor area ratio is always one of those things in Revit that it wasn't really capable of, not in the way that you would want it to be, at least. Because like I said, Revit tends to silo data. So when you're calculating floor area ratio, you're obviously taking property line information. I think that's the completed one. You're taking property line information, and you're taking floor area numbers. And so you have to combine the two together. And Revit doesn't really do that all that well, but Dynamo can. So here, this down here is essentially the same thing that I showed you in the previous one. You're getting a category, in this case it's mass floors, and then you're pulling out the floor area. So let's look at what this file actually is. This is the file here, and you can see there's a property line in here with 3 buildings on it. And I want to calculate what the FAR is. So now another way of selecting items in a Revit file, this just grabs everything of a particular category. But if I need to select just one particular thing, I can use the select model elements. And there is a singular and a plural version. I'm going to use the singular version here. Now it's yellow because I haven't selected anything. But I'm going to slide this over a little bit and zoom in, and then I'm going to hit select, go into Revit. I'm going to hit the tab to make sure that it's selecting the property line, the entire property line, and not just one segment. And then as soon as I do that, you can see that the element ID for the property line is now in Dynamo. So that tells me that it's grabbed it, and it's now in Dynamo. So I'm going to plug that in to this get parameter, and the the parameter that I want out of the property line is the area, because if you look in Revit, if I click on the property line, you can see that Revit knows what the area of the property line is. So I need to get that into Dynamo. And so to do that, I just type area and plug that in there. And then that, when I run it, that number that was in Revit is now in Dynamo. So now this is the part that Revit's not that good at. It's combining these two things. And that is just a simple math equation. So you use the divide operator and you plug that into X and you plug this into Y. And then to see the result, I'll use a watch node. And then you'll get the FAR when I hit run. Except, of course, this isn't work. Oh, there's one step I forgot. See how I'm getting all of these numbers? That's because it's getting a bunch of floor numbers here. The one step I forgot was I need a SOM for all of the floors. I don't want it to calculate per floor, so plug that in, and now I'll get just one number, and that's the FAR, so 0.25. And the beauty of this is that I can have my Revit model open, and I can, if the FAR is off or I need to change something, I can just go in here, grab onto one of these guys, and I'm just going to radically change it here just to makes the number really different. Do that, and then go back into Dynamo, hit run, and the number instantly updates. So if you're doing this kind of thing, you can model in Revit, make changes in Revit. Dynamo is running in the background, and it can tell you live, actually, the ramifications of your design changes in Revit. What do you mean? Oh, you mean the X this way? Yeah. You want me to do that?
Isn't that the flow areas? Yeah, you got the equation's backwards.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, sorry. So there you go. Wires crossed now. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you is working with Excel and Dynamo. So I'm going to exit out of these files, open up the next one, and this happens to be the file that everybody knows. It's the Revit example file. But what I'm going to do in this one is work with some rooms and export those rooms out to Dynamo. So we're going to get some parameters. Now this here may look a little more complicated, but it's essentially the same thing that I've shown you so far. So you're grabbing a category, rooms, and then I'm getting all these different parameters, and those parameters happen to be listed down here. So I'm getting level, number, name, department, area, comments, and element ID. And so all of that gets plugged in up here, and then I have the element ID, which is actually its own particular node. And so what I'm going to do now is I have to put all of this together to create a list, and then that list goes into Excel. And so when you're creating a list of something, you need the create list. And you can expand this to have however many items that you want. So in this case, I'm going to take all of these guys and plug them in like so. And I need one more. And that generates a list. I'm going to actually change this to automatic, so it'll just run in the background. But now what I want to do is in Excel, I need to have a header for this. And so I'm going to create another list. I'm just going to copy paste that. So Control-C, Control-V to copy nodes. Unfortunately, it attaches all these wires to it. So I want these wires to be attached to these names. So I'm going to plug all of these in like this, and this is going to be the header of my Excel file. One of the things that I try to do as much as possible is make sure that you're not duplicating data or not duplicating an effort. So the same nodes that are being used to get the parameter are also being used to generate the header as well. But these are all written in lowercase, so I want them to be uppercase in the Excel file. So I'm going to say string upper, and this just simply converts it all to uppercase. And then what I need to do is this list that's coming out of here, you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that what's coming out of this node is a list of all the levels, then a list of all the names, all the numbers. I don't want that. I want the data for each room to sort of be grouped together. So to switch rows and columns, essentially, you're going to transpose the node. And so I hit transpose, and now what I get out of this is you can see each list is the complete list for each individual room. So what was columns is now rows. And that's how I need the data in the Excel file. But now I have to take this list and add this to it. And so there is a node called list add item to front. And so what I'm going to do is the item that I'm adding is the header, and then my list is this. And then you can see that now that first list, the 0 list, if I zoom in here, is the header information, and then all of the rooms follow. So now that we have the data that we need coming from the Revit model, now I need to write this to Excel. So I just type Excel, write to file, and then the first thing I need is a file path. So I type file path, that goes in there. I hit browse. I'm just going to do this to my desktop, and I'm going to call it rooms, and then hit open. It doesn't actually open anything because the file doesn't exist yet. And then the sheet name, the default in Excel is just sheet 1, so we'll use that. Now the start row and the start column, it's not asking for a 1 or an A, it's asking the number. So if you want the spreadsheets to start in 1A, it would just be 0 for both the start row and the start column. And then my data, now before I plug the data in here, I'm actually going to make it manual because I don't want it to just go. I'm going to plug the data in there, and then the overwrite, that just is asking if the file already exists, do you want to overwrite it or not? And so that's just a true false. So you type in Boolean, and then that can be whatever you want. You can say go ahead and overwrite the file if it already exists. So now I just hit run, and it gets just a couple of seconds, and then it generates an Excel file. And so this is all of your data from the Revit model now here in Excel. So potentially what you can do is put this in any other sort of format, but you notice that the department and the comments are empty. So you could put information in for the department, put information in for comments, whatever you want to do, and then you could conceivably take this same Excel file, the edited version, and then push it back into Revit. Now, there's other programs that do that. Idea BIMlink is one that a lot of people use. We use it here in the office. But Dynamo essentially does the same thing. So just to show you how that would work, I have a definition that does that. And we'll look, it's this one. So what this definition does, it's a finished definition. It takes the rooms, and then it gives me a list of the rooms that are in the Revit model. And then it's reading an Excel file that already exists. It is then taking that information, removing the header, and then adding department to that. Or it's basically taking the department information and then putting it into the Revit model. And you can see here is the set parameter for department. Now, the file that this is pointing at, or actually let me do it this way. So the file that this is pointing at is this guy right here. And it has, let me go ahead and open that just to prove what I'm doing here. So the Excel file, this one, has departments that have been filled in. Now this is technically a separate Revit file, or a separate Excel file, but it's essentially the same process. But I went ahead and in Excel put departments in for all of the rooms. And so what this Dynamo definition is going to do is essentially take those rooms and populate the department. Now the key thing that you have to do here is make sure that your rooms in Revit are sorted in the same order as the rooms coming from Excel. If they're not, you're going to get this jumble and they're not going to sync up. The way that I usually do that is by element ID, because everything in Revit has an element ID. It's the common denominator. So what I did here is I said sort by the element ID, sort all of the rooms by element ID coming out of Revit. So now they're all in order. And then in the Excel file, I actually just in Excel sorted by element ID. So the rooms are in the coming from the two different programs, they're in the same order. So now, sliding this over, and I think I have a schedule in here for the rooms. So this is just an ordinary Revit schedule. You can see the department is empty. But then when I hit run, and now the departments are full. So if you've ever tried to enter information into a Revit schedule, it can be a very painful process. This does it in mere seconds. And it's much easier and, quite frankly, more fun to put it into Excel and do it that way rather than having to do it in Revit. There are other programs, like I said, that do this exact thing. One of them is this BIMlink, which we use here in the office. BIMlink does exactly what I just described, but Dynamo has a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you can manipulate the data. I just keep rambling on here. Are there any questions so far? If you do have questions or anything, please feel free to speak up along the way.
Back
Yep.
into the Revit model, is that just doing it by the order, or is taking into account the element ID? Is it based on those?
The order.
It filters it by that.
Yes.
But if there's more element IDs in your Excel file and not in your Revit, it's gonna confuse it.
Yes.
And it's gonna
Yeah.
have an error, so it has to match exactly.
Yeah. The idea is that you export the rooms from Revit, and then you edit the Excel file, and then you immediately put them back in. I would never ever do something like, export it out to Excel and then 5 days later try to put it, because then rooms have changed and all of that. So you always have to make sure that the data is up to date.
Can you verify the element ID? And then putting it back in?
When you say verify, what do you mean?
Like check for matches and only update if the element ID.
Yeah, you could do that, but it just requires more nodes.
If Revit has more rooms, and then you're pushing in your Excel file, so if I went back and put in more rooms in Revit after I had pushed out the Excel file, and the spec writer will populate the Excel file, and you push it back, it'll be fine. What she's saying is like somebody went in and pulled out a couple of rooms from the Revit model. In that case, I think it's going to throw an asset.
Yeah.
Can you look it up to other things besides Excel?
I think so, but yeah. You can do other formats.
Other flat tables.
PHP file.
There's a lot of work at the factory that in that area. So right now it talks to Revit, it talks to Excel, CSV files, but they're looking at other products in the Autodesk portfolio, and who knows what else in the future. So I suppose anything with an API theoretically you could write to.
You can push up to Tableau also.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice to know.
A standalone product that Revit offers, or that Autodesk offers, and it doesn't actually talk to Revit. If you just run Dynamo Studio, it's just standalone. So there's definitely an effort at Autodesk to make it a more standalone product. So it only gets the Revit communication piece when you actually run Revit first.
Is there like a reference guide that takes you through all the different nodes that you were searching for?
There is one actually on the BIM Dynamo BIM mark. The
Yeah.
Dynamo Primer is pretty extensive.
But you know, there's literally thousands of nodes, and you know, once you start loading in the packages and the number gets out of control really quickly. So how I've learned is, you know, if I am doing something focused on walls, for example, what I'll do is I'll just type walls in here, and then I'll see what nodes I get. And if one of them looks interesting, I put it in there and I try to figure out what it does. And so that's kind of how I've learned Dynamo, is I know that I want to do a particular thing, and so I type a phrase or, you know, word or whatever in, and I just start playing with the nodes and see what I can do with it. And that's essentially how I've kind of taught myself how to do this. I am by no means an expert with this. I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know how to do yet, but you know, it eventually starts to click with you, and you kind of understand the logic, and it gets easier as you go. Okay, so that is the end of the data mining part, the pure data. Now we're going to talk about setting up a project. And what I have here in this is essentially just an empty file. I went ahead and work shared it, but I just, you know, that's it. I just hit the workset button and generated the two default. Here at SOM we rename the two default, but those are just the two, you know, workset one sort of things. So I haven't done anything other than just turning it into a central file. That's all I've done. So now what I'm going to do is set up the worksets, set up the levels, generate all the floor plan views, and organize the project browser. And I can do all of that. If I was, you know, focused and you could do it, I could do all of that in, you know, probably 2 minutes versus, you know, what would probably take you 30 minutes to do it manually in Revit. So the first step is to create the worksets. Now, in this particular case, this is one of those cases where it's a good idea to have kind of a library of files that you can always refer to. And so what we have is a file that is an Excel file, and it looks like this. And so it has, in this particular case, it has just some default worksets. These are typical worksets that basically end up in almost every file that we use. And so it's just an Excel file that lists the worksets. But what that does is that just sits on our network someplace, and then whenever I need to generate a new project file, I just plug into that workset file using this definition. And this is the most simple definition that I'm going to show you today, because there's just two more things that you have to do to it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and that just opens up the Excel file. But the data that's coming out of this, you can see, is lists of lists, which is not what I need. I just want the workset names. And so the first thing I have to do is flatten that list. And when you flatten a list, it basically just, you know, takes all of the sub-lists out of it. And now I have just the pure list of workset names. And then this is a custom node that I'm about to use. It comes from the Rhythm package, and it's called Workset Create. Now a package is a group of custom nodes, and you know that it's a custom node because it has these little extra tabs on it in the background there. And it's a node that somebody has created that knows more about Dynamo than I do. And it's just a function. And so I can plug this in here, hit run. And remember when I showed you the worksets the first time, there was just 2 of them. But if I move Dynamo out of the way here, and I go back to worksets, you can see now all those worksets are in the file. And so I don't have to type each one of those and, you know, do all that manually. Just boom, they're in there. Now, you know, every project is unique. There's going to be special worksets that are only going to be needed for that particular project, and you can still put those in, of course. But this gets you to a starting point where you can just go with it from there. So that's the first step. That's the easy part. Now we're going to create all of the levels for this project and all of the floor plan views. So I'll close that and open up the next one. And once again, this is basically what I've already shown you. So it's just taking a file, it's reading from that file from the Excel file. So if I hit run here, it opens up the Excel file, and this file contains the level names, the elevation of the level above 0, and then floor-to-floor heights. Now, a lot of times, at least here in the office, we generate these Excel files, much more complicated Excel files than this. I mean, it's tracking a whole bunch of data. But these Excel files are generated typically even before the design of the building starts, or right as the building design starts. So you don't have to necessarily generate one of these Excel files from scratch. If the project that you're working on already has one that lists what all the levels are and what their elevations are, you can just use that. This file was created specifically for this demo, however, so it's slightly easier to work with. But what I'm going to do is read this Excel file, and the first thing I need to do is, once again, I need to transpose the list, because unlike the last time, I need just the list of the level names, just the list of the elevations. And so what I'm going to do is transpose the list, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to automatic just so that it runs and I don't have to keep hitting run for the time being. And so now you can see I've got one list of the level names and one list of the elevations. Now this third list I don't actually need. That was just for my own benefit in Excel to kind of know what the floor-to-floor heights were. So I'm just going to end up ignoring that third list. But what I want to do is just get the level names and just get the elevations and isolate them from one another. So that is another node that you will use over and over and over and over again, and that is get item at index. And so it's saying you have this index of items, extract out just one of them. And so this is my list, and my index in this particular case is 1, I believe. Yes. So the elevations. And so all I have to do is, using a code block, just type 1 in there, and that pulls out all of the elevations. And then I'm just going to copy those two nodes, because I'm lazy, and then change this code block to 0, and that pulls out just the names. Now the reason I had to separate them out is because the next node that I'm going to use, which is level by elevation and name, which is here. Now before I do this, I'm actually going to set it back to manual, because I don't want it to just go off and do this. So we plug the elevations into where it says elevations, we plug the names into here, and so now when I hit run, it's going to generate all of the levels. And so we'll go ahead and slide this over. We'll look at an elevation view. Now also I forgot to mention, there is just one level in the project. Revit obviously will not let you delete all levels, so you have to have one. So in that Excel file, what I did is I just included all the levels and I left level 1 out. So it has all of them but level 1, and because it's already in the file. And so now when I hit run, it's going to generate all the rest of the levels. But just to have maximum impact here, I'm going to finish out the definition and by adding the views. So I'm going to say I want floor plan views. Let's see, floor plan view by level. So now it's going to take all of these levels that it got from the Excel file, it's going to generate a floor plan for all of those. But that's not the end. I also want to organize the project browser. So I don't want all of these new floor plan views just to end up in the question marks. I want them to actually get filed properly in the project browser. So I'll go over here, and this is set parameter by name, and let's see. So the floor plan is the element in this case, and the parameter name is, this is what we use here in the office. It's view type group. That's the parameter that we use to organize our project browser. So that's the parameter name. And then the value, in this case, is 100 floor plans. And then just to save time, I'm just going to copy those 3 nodes, Control C, Control V, and then change this to say view use group, and then this is going to be working views. So this definition is doing 3 things. It's creating the levels, it's creating the floor plan views, and it's organizing the project browser. So now if I slide this over, zoom out so you can see the levels being generated, hit run, there's all the new levels. If I go into the project browser, there's all of my floor plan views. They're all empty, of course, because I haven't done anything in the file, but they're filed in the project browser accordingly. Now if you've ever, especially a project that has a lot of levels like this, if you've ever tried to create them manually and then generate all the views for them, that can be a very time-consuming process, and this took mere seconds to do that. And the beauty of this is that these are very simple, straightforward, sort of generic definitions. And so what we have is we have a library of these generic definitions, these project setup definitions. They're saved on the network, so whenever somebody starts up a project, they can just go grab one of those definitions, run it, and before they know it, they're up and running with a new project file.
Do you know if the data in the Excel file needs to be typed in? What can be in case of the...
It's just reading whatever is in the cell.
So even if it's a formula.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is just using a very simple, straightforward Excel file. You can have, the data coming from, not consecutive columns. You can have, well, I'm about to show you how to generate sheets, and a lot of times I'll get Excel files that have the A in one column and then the number in the next column. That doesn't matter. You can combine, combine those things and then generate. It's just a little bit more complicated to do, but whatever format it is in Excel, even if it's complicated, you can get it into a format that Dynamo will understand and Revit will understand. So now the last step of the project setup is generating sheets. So just like the other ones, we have an Excel file that it's reading. So I'll go ahead and hit run. And the Excel file is this guy right here. So this is a very short little example sheet list. But you can see it's got numbers and then it's got the names of the sheets. Obviously, you can have extremely extensive sheet lists and it will generate them for you. And all of this here is essentially pretty much the same thing that I showed you with the levels. You're just transposing the list and you're grabbing 2 items, the name and the number of the sheets. And the tricky part here, and I didn't get this at first, I got very frustrated because I thought that Dynamo was missing a key node until somebody pointed out to me how to actually get it to work. So the node that you're looking for is sheet by name and number, title block, and view. And so the sheet name is coming from, must be coming from this one. The sheet number is coming from here. So you plug that into sheet number. And then the title block is you're just grabbing a title block that already exists in the file, and that is a family type. This family type node is one that you'll use a lot, but it lists all of the families that are in the file currently. And so I just type TITL, etc., and then it goes down to where the title block is. Plug that into here. And this is the part that I didn't understand when I first started doing this, is that it's asking for a view. But I'm just setting up a project. I don't even have views to put on sheets. So there's a trick here, and that is if you've ever tried to take a blank view and put it onto a sheet inside Revit, Revit says, no, can't do it. It's got to have something in the view. So you can use that to your advantage here. And in Revit, in this file, here I'm just grabbing views. I have created a view in here, which I think for some reason it ends up not alphabetical, which is annoying. There it is, blank view. So this is a drafting view that I created in the file. It's blank. There's absolutely nothing on it. If you plug that in there, that satisfies Revit. When it tries to place that view onto the sheet, it says, nope, can't do it, and it just keeps right on moving to the next sheet. And so it just generates all your sheets. There's no views on them, and that's it. So if I go over here, you can see there's no sheets in this file right now. If I hit run, boom, there's all of your sheets. How long did that take? Like a second? Sheets are one of the most annoying things to have to create manually in Revit because, you know, it's like a one-off sort of a thing. And here you can conceivably create your entire sheet list in mere seconds by doing it this way. So that's all the project setup stuff that I wanted to show you. And of course, there's lots of other things that you could do to potentially, you know, set up your projects. But now I want to talk a little bit about more sort of after a project has started, you're well on the road, and managing things after the project has started. And the first thing that I want to show you, how are we doing on time here? First thing I want to show you is scope box views. Sorry, let's open up you have to open up the Revit file before you can switch Dynamo files, which is annoying. So this guy right here, we're running short on time, so I'm actually going to, rather than kind of going through step by step, I'm going to open up the completed version of the Dynamo definition. And so go to the completed version, and then what I'm looking for is the create scope box views. So this definition was a result of somebody coming to me and saying they had to create a whole bunch of enlarged stair plans, like a whole bunch of them, like a lot, and didn't want to have to do it manually. In fact, that person's here in the room, actually. And so I created this definition that now takes all of those levels that you need to create a stair plan for, grabs a section box that is around that stair, crops the view, duplicates the view, crops the view to that scope box, files it or changes the view scale to a higher scale, and then files it in the project browser for you. So I'll just kind of quickly go through how this all works. So I'm using, in this case, a custom node. It's an Archilab custom node. And what it's doing is I'm grabbing all of the floor plans in the file. So I'm just saying, show me all the floor plans that exist in the Revit file. But then after I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and run this. It is actually going to generate a bunch of views. This is what it's doing. I've got 2 scope boxes in here around stairs, and it's actually going to generate a whole bunch of other views that'll get sorted under 300 here. So let me just, before I hit run, let me just verify that the settings are correct here. So stair 1, and okay, so it should be fine. So I hit run, and then what it does, as you can see here, is it generated a bunch of 300 enlarged plan views, and it's the stair cropped, and the scale has changed. And how I did that is I'm grabbing all of the floor plans from the file. This watch node lists all the floor plans, and then based on the name here, the level name, it's not, there it goes, I can figure out which index I need. So I just look at this list, I say, okay, I need level 1, 2, whatever the levels are, and then I make note of what their index number is, and then I type in the index numbers here And so these are the essentially these are the levels that I want to generate. And then I take those levels, I get their index numbers, and then I say duplicate the view. And so this is a custom node. It's from the Clockwork package, and it basically just takes a view and duplicates it. But when it duplicates it, you know in Revit it appends copy and then a number to all the view names just automatically. So the first thing that we have to do, and that's what's in the orange area here, is take those duplicated views and just strip them of the copy number. So what this does is it says string remove, and so it says start index. Well, if you say number space YPOC space, that's 7 characters backwards. And so you say take the last, go to the 7th character from the end, and then remove 7 characters. So what it does is it basically it removes everything from the string after the level name. And then what I have to do is add stair T1 to the front of that. So it's going to be stair T1, level 1, level 2, level whatever. And so I have to take the count of however many I have of these levels and then apply that to each one. And so that's what this count and then list of repeated items is. And so I take that list of repeated items, which is stair T1, stair T1, stair T1, and I pair that up with all of the level 1, level 2, level whatever. Combine that together and then set the parameter for the view, and that changes all the names of the duplicated views. And then the last step is just filing them, the last step here is then grabbing the scope box. But when you say it grabs all the scope boxes, it just gives you an element ID. So it doesn't really tell you anything. So I have to use this get parameter value to find out what the name is. This tells me what the name is. That tells me what index I need to then grab the proper scope box. And then using, once again, the set parameter by name, scope box is just a parameter of the view. And so I say scope box and then grab this scope box, change the view scale, file it in the project browser. And that saves a lot of time. Did it save you a lot of time, Parker? Yeah. And you can, it's not just for stairs. You can do this for anything. You can, generate obviously views based on scope boxes for anything, very, very quickly using this technique. And one other thing just to be aware of, changing the scale, it does the 1/24 that, so you type in 24 and that gives you, if you're an imperial, 1/2 inch scale. So that was one thing that kind of tripped me up a little bit when I was doing the scale. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to show you about project management, and that is sort of the holy grail around here. For the longest time, people have been complaining to me about numbering views on sheets. So particularly for detail sheets or any kind of sheet where you have a lot of views on the sheet. And there's a couple of problems. One is, at least here in this office, we're supposed to have a particular number based on where the detail is on the sheet. So 1 is up here, it goes to 1, 2, 3, 4. There's no real, or up until now, there was no real way to get it to automatically sort of know where the views were on the sheet and number them accordingly. The other problem is that you've probably run into this before, is that if you take detail 2 and try to rename it to detail 1, but detail 1 already exists, you have to rename detail 1, put an X, and it becomes a nightmare. So this definition that I'm going to show you solves all of those problems, and I just hope, fingers crossed, it actually works for me now. It's actually a pretty complicated definition, so I don't have time to go through every step. But the Revit file is this, and so this is an example sheet, and so these numbers here are just text. I just put those in there so you know what the numbers are supposed to be, and so it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 20. And so if I open up the definition, detail numbering, this is, as you can see, the most complicated definition that I've shown you so far. But in a nutshell, what it does is it grabs the current view, whatever the current view is. It grabs all the viewports on that current view. And then the first thing it does is it takes all of those and renames them by putting an X after the number. So that eliminates the duplicate problem, because the first thing it does is just renumbers everything to X. And then, now that everything has an X after the name, it's free to go through all of these different manipulations to arrive at a point where it knows that 1 goes up in the upper right corner and 20 goes down in the lower left corner. Now, how you arrive at that, Neil helped me out on this with the math of trying to figure this out, because most of this definition is just math, to get the numbers working. But essentially, it takes the title block, it gets the size of the sheet from the title block, you subtract the margins, because you just want the box of the title block itself. And then through a series of mathematical operations, it defines the, quote, column that the detail is in, it defines the row that the detail is in, it does some mathematical calculations, and then it arrives at a number. And so now if I go back into Revit, I have a bunch of details here, and so I'm going to intentionally put number 1 in the number 2 position, and I'm going to intentionally put number 2 in the 1 position. And then we'll throw some other ones in here. Yeah. I thought about using real ones, but I was like, no, I'm too lazy to do that. So now I've got a bunch of details in here. You can see that it numbered them, as you place them. But now what I'm going to do is run this definition, and it will change all of those numbers to match the text that's in each box. And so I hit run. It's completed, and look at that. So now 1 is in the 1 position, 2 is in the 2 position, 7 is in the 7 position, 12, 19, 14, etc. Now the only glitch to this is, and maybe somebody knows how to fix this, but I can only get this particular definition to run once. So if I have to go to another sheet, I have to actually close this file, open it again, and then run it on another sheet. But that's still faster than going through the nightmare of having to redo all the numbers all the time.
You could just pick a sheet.
Yep.
Or something like that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's choosing the active view. So the way that this works is right here at the beginning, whatever the active view is in Revit, whatever the screen that you're looking at, the sheet that you're looking at, that's what it runs the definition on. So now if I go to a second sheet, so if I have a second sheet here, I could run it again. Yeah.
I know what the issue is. Can you open up the active view custom node?
Just a second here. I figured it had something to do with this guy.
Okay, so that Python script.
Yep.
I don't know if you know Python at all, but if you add an input for, say, a variable, like an if-else,
Yeah.
and make it a true-false thing, so say run when it's true and don't run when it's not true, you can add a Boolean that will reset the active view as soon as you change. Because what's happening is it's running once, and then when you change the view, it's
Right.
still referencing that other one.
I see.
But if you set the true-false, you can just click the Boolean true-false, and then
Yeah.
instead of having to close the whole definition.
I suspected it had something to do with the active view thing, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. So, yeah. But like I said, that even if you do have to close it and then reopen it again, that's still way easier than having to deal with renumbering everything manually.
We recently got an add-on for Revit, which
Mhm.
does the renumbering, and you just click on the order that you want it to be numbered. So you have all your V's on this sheet,
Mhm.
and you just click it in the order that you want, and it renumbers everything.
Right.
Instantly on it. But before that, yes, it was a nightmare. trying
Yeah.
to-
So that's it. That's all that I had. I plan on making all of these files that I've shown you tonight available to everybody. The Revit files, the Dynamo definitions, and there's a few bonus ones that I didn't have time to get to. They're also included. And then I recorded this, so we'll have the recording posted as well.
Ryan, that was awesome. Well, thanks questions for Brian before we?
Yeah, were you able to get any of this to run in a sketch mode?
Probably. I haven't never even tried that, but I doubt that would work.
Like I'm thinking like in the topography tool, if you wanted to
Yeah.
pick an object.
There's a few topography nodes. I've done some things. I've used the topography nodes to, for example, take a flat floor and have the floor drape along the topography. So there are things that you can do with the topography that doesn't necessarily require you to be in a sketch mode. So.
Have you looked at aligning views on a sheet? Because we've looked at that a couple times, and the issue we're having in the scripts that we've developed are that it depends on the view, so it might align the view by the center, but
Yep.
not necessarily by the. It's been really difficult to try and get it by the edge of it.
Yeah. That's one of the things that's on my to-do list to solve. But I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I think in order to Dynamo has the ability of placing views on sheets. It can do that, but to place a view on a sheet in a specific location, it's my understanding that requires Python, and that's way above my knowledge. But it's my understanding.
Lower left-hand corner, which is like off the title block. And
So if you want to set something up to be in a specific location, I've been told it's possible, but it requires sort of another level of knowledge to be able to do it, and it requires Python. So,
you know what I loved about some of the examples you showed, and I've slowly come to this realization myself. But I think a lot of times when we see this, Dynamo in general, we're kind of thinking in terms of, can I just have something that I can, people talk about, can I put that on a button, or can I put it on a ribbon, or whatever? And it's not a we're not creating executable files. I mean, these are scripts. And so I've been slowly realizing, you do the stuff in Dynamo that Dynamo does best, and you do the stuff in the other tools that the other tools do best. So being able to run Revit and Dynamo side by side, being able to go into Excel, and like you said, just sort it in Excel. Excel has that tool. We don't have to reinvent that wheel in Dynamo, where it might take 10 nodes to get it where you want in Excel. Like I've been doing all my processing just in Excel, using Excel skills and concatenating things, doing whatever, just creating a list and then just putting it back in Dynamo, because then your definition goes from being this down to this, and it's much easier to troubleshoot and understand. And so I love that about all your examples, is they were very compact like that. Mm-hmm. And I think you only get to that point when you've done enough of them and tried to do, eat the whole elephant in one script and realize that it was a bad idea. So I don't know if that was your experience, but that's where how I started arriving at that.
No, I think when I started learning Dynamo probably about a year and a half ago, and what you get that moment where you feel like things are starting to click, you're starting to get it, and you're starting to understand it. And the thing for me was understanding how lists work. That was the key for me. Once I sort of got how lists work, everything sort of fell into place, and I started, basically guessing at how the structure of the data had to be set, just because I had that list of knowledge of lists. And so if you're trying to learn Dynamo, I would highly recommend just type in the word list and just go node by node and literally open them up and see what they do to understand how all those nodes work, because those list nodes are going to be the key to, I think, understanding how Dynamo works. And if you understand how the lists are manipulated or can be manipulated, then you basically got it, in my opinion.
And I think even if you're doing geometry gymnastics, the lists also.
Yeah, it's across the board. So.
It's the ordering of the data.
Exactly.
It's the same with Grasshopper.
Yep.
If you understand the sequence in the list, you can do a lot of things.
Yeah. And you have to be aware of the type of data that you're dealing with, because there's elements, but then sometimes you don't need the element, but you need like the element name or some other parameter. And so whether you're dealing with the element or some part of the element, you deal with the data in a slightly different way, and then you can figure out ways of looping that data back to the element itself. And so that's all about lists, and that's all about list manipulation. And so that's my number one recommendation for learning. Any other questions, comments?
Custom levels.
Yes.
I'm sort of skeptical of using custom nodes. Not that I don't think that they're good, but that someone needs to, if I'm creating a definition for someone else to use, to make sure that they also have the same custom node that I'm using, I think could be a problem.
Well, Neil, you and I have talked about this before, and in my opinion, I think that's something you just have to get over. Because
some of the functionality otherwise is very difficult, like that
yeah, because
just like that list without that is like
yeah, because a package or a custom node, some of these like this, the active view node and where is it here? There's one of them. There's one node in here, I forget where it is. This guy right here, coming from the Hollandaise node, Nate Holland. This entire definition, this entire workflow is not possible without this node. Dynamo does not have the capability of doing this without that node right there. So some nodes are like that, where you just simply can't do it without it. But then there's other nodes that maybe you could do it without it, but it would take 20 nodes to do what the one node does. And so there can be shortcuts. And then custom nodes are sometimes, the simplest ones, are just a collection of pre-existing nodes. There's nothing special about it at all. Maybe it's just a routine that you have to run on lots of definitions, and rather than putting the same 6 nodes in every single time, you just package it together as one node and boom, you're done.
But if you do that, it's self-contained.
Yes.
You don't have to have someone else download something from someone else. Is that right?
They have to have the custom node loaded onto their computer. So regardless, it has to exist on their hard drive. Otherwise, Dynamo can't read it.
yeah, but it'll tell you need that package.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, if you need a package, you just go up here and you say search for package, and, you whatever name it is, and you just download it. I mean, they couldn't make it more simple, in my opinion. I mean, it's really easy. And, these definitions that I created, this definition here is one of the examples that I have on our SOM network, so that anybody can just go and grab this node or this definition. And so whenever we put something onto our library, and this is what I would recommend for everybody, we have notes at the very front. And in this case, if there are any custom nodes that are required, we always have a note in here that says required packages. You've got to have these loaded or else this thing's not going to work. And so they can read that and they can say, oh, I have Archilab, but maybe I don't have Spring nodes. And so they can go and download it. And then there's also, in some cases, some general notes that basically explains, you have to check this and that before it will run. And then I also group everything and then, just basically note the hell out of the definition so that everybody understands exactly, what the train of thought is going through.
It's also good for yourself when you come back to it. a month
Exactly.
later when you're trying to figure out.
There's been plenty of times, there's been plenty of times where, I'll have a definition like this, which is pretty complicated, and then I'll open it up a week later and I'll look at it and I was like, I don't understand any of this anymore. What in the, but the nodes or the notes help. You can read the node and say, oh, that's what I was thinking when I was doing that. And so it does help. And to create a note, it's just Control W. And then it adds a note. Yep.
Yeah, I know there are a bunch of different packages, but maybe like in an email that you guys send out, could you maybe just list off a good number of them that you think are worthy to have?
Yeah, I have a list that I tell people around the office. So.
If anybody has a favorite package, send it my way and we can start compiling a list on the group. Sure, that's a great idea. I'd love to see some resources like that for the group so that it's more than just the meetings. It's a place where we can go. And even if it's just, I go to this route, this place for this and I go to that for that, or, yeah, I think that'd be awesome.
How do you create the node again?
The
node.
if you want to create a note, it's just you just go into a space and then hit Control W and it adds the note, and then to edit it you just double click in it and type something.
Okay, it's on one of the menus too.
You're not a shortcut kind of guy.
Does this work in the family editor?
Say it again?
Does this work in the family editor?
Oh, yeah.
It does, but it's more restrictive, but it will work on families as well.
Bottom line is that whatever they've exposed from the Revit API, which isn't everything, they've been curating, because I guess in a very early version of Dynamo, they just, and Colin I think said this at the last meeting, they just said, oh, let's expose everything, and it was like a disaster. You know, there was no way to, so they've been instead picking and choosing, which means that sometimes you want to do something, and the feature you want to manipulate in Revit isn't exposed in the API, and that's why people get into this Python script and other things, right? Because they can access it by writing real code in there. But
The big thing, one of the big things that's not exposed at the moment is visibility graphics. So anything that's on the visibility graphics dialog box, nope, Dynamo can't do it. Now that's not to say that you couldn't do a Python script and get it to do it, because there are add-ins out there that do visibility graphics stuff. So that means it is exposed to the API, but it's just not exposed to Dynamo. And so once they expose the visibility graphics, then wow, that just opens up a whole new area.
Not to plug myself too much, but I actually wrote a package that changes line lengths and colors. It's called Pliskin.
so you're gonna send it to me, and
Yeah, okay.
I'll get it out. You'll be the first one on the package list, the new Dynamo community package list. We'll put you right at the top.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Conrad has something as well, which is part of Archilab, I think, right? And it's for Excel stuff. I think it's manipulating.
Yeah, Bumblebee.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's there's, like I said,
Am I the only one that thinks these names are hilarious? Is the whole
Right,
like
that's
it?
the point.
Yeah, sorry.
there's things that may not be exposed to Dynamo specifically, but as you can see, it's exposed to the general Revit API, and if it's exposed to that, you could create either a custom node through Python or an add-in, or so there's other ways of accessing it, but you can't. There are certain things that you can't directly access through Dynamo right now, unfortunately.
There were actually a bunch of packages that Colin mentioned at our last meeting too.
Yeah.
So if you go back and watch that video.
As you can see, I've got most of them loaded here. So.
Yeah, I noticed you had quite an extensive list. So, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I'll be happy to compile that. But if folks just want to,
And the good thing is
send
like
them to
the whole community has vetted those out. Like
Yeah.
if there's any bug, like they report it back and he fixes it and
Yeah.
it's boom, it's like
Yeah.
all that.
this is super rapid development. Yeah.
No, it's like all that much like by the time you had written that, there would be like probably 50 nodes and like.
Yeah. I remember I emailed Zach one time a comment about the primer. You were mentioning the primer, and like within an hour he said, "Oh, he was so embarrassed. Like he's sitting in the next cube over. He was so embarrassed that you found that, and he's already changed it on the thing." I'm like, "Okay, wow." Like I wish Autodesk was that responsive. Like with the other stuff. I mean, and in less than an hour and it's fixed. That's awesome. So, all right. Well, I don't have any after business this week other than to just say we do need a presenter for July's meeting. So if anybody either wants to do it or knows somebody in your office that would like to do it, start working on it.
Is it possible we might get the Autodesk guy though for July?
It's possible, but I mean, even if it doesn't work out for July, we'd like to have people queued up.